the Commissioners Task Force together, and thank you for participating. At this point, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the agenda with some minor changes. Your agenda says that we'll start with a welcome by the Commissioner. That will come later. We're going to have I'm going to call it to order. We need to approve the agenda. And then I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. And I'm going to call you in order that I have you on the list. And just, we're all here because we represent somebody. And we don't need to go through, we don't need your complete, your complete resume, but we'd like to just know who you represent. Because like I know about 2/3 of you, I met about 2/3 of you, but and then we'll develop relationships over the next several months when we're working together. So at this time, with those changes, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make that motion, Chairman Porter. Move we approve the agenda as changed or amended.
Okay, thank you. That's Brenda Dietrich. And second the motion?
I'll second that motion, sir.
Okay, Adam Thomas seconded the motion. Thank you very much. And we'll move forward. At this time, I'm going to just go through the list, and this will be the only time we do this. From now on, our Michaela will just pick it up off the participants list. But we need to know who we are as we start. As you have questions, and you later on, if you'll just put something in the chat book, just say question. And we'll have people monitoring that, and I'll call on you in the order that you do that. You don't have to put the question in the chat box. Just indicate that you have a question. At this time, I'll start the process of introducing the members of the task force, and this will also take the place of the roll call. I'm Jim Porter. I'm the current chairman of the Kansas State Board of Education, and I'm a retired school administrator. And if you put what I'm doing now as part of education, this is year number 53 for me. Janet, you're next. Janet.
Before I introduce myself, shouldn't we vote on that motion, Mr. Chair?
Did we not do that?
No.
Okay, raise your hand if you approve the motion. Thank you. I did not see it. Opposed? Thank you very much. Janet has sat next to me most of the time since I've been on the State Board of Education, and it regularly keeps me in order. So that's
I try. I'm Janet Waugh. I'm vice chair and a member of District 1 on the State Board of Education.
And I tend to be informal, so I'm just going to call you by your first name as we go through this. And if you object to that, let me know, and I'll not do it. Brenda.
Hello, everybody. Yes, Brenda Dietrich. I'm a state senator now. I was in the House for 4 years, and I'm a retired superintendent. I had 40 years in education. Jim, I think you had me beat.
Pat. You are muted.
I'm Brad Bergsma, USD. Brad Bergsma, USD 352 in Goodland, Kansas. I'm also the president-elect of KSB.
Okay, Pat Petty.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm Senator Pat Petty. I'm in my third term in the Kansas Senate, and I was a public school educator for 36 years.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Adam Thomas. I'm a state representative. This is my second term, and I have only been around for 38 years, so I'd say your experience beats my entire lifetime. And so I'm very happy to be here. I have 5 kids, 4 of them in the Olathe School District, and 1 that's 2 years old and taking a nap right now.
Okay. And Adam will serve as the vice chair of this group, and we thank you for doing that. Simone. Maybe everybody's not here. Let's go ahead. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Peters. I'm the executive director for Salina Public Schools. I'm in my 20th year, about ready to finish that up. And before that, I was in public accounting for 7.5 years.
Okay, welcome. Mike.
Good afternoon, Mike Argerbright, South Lyon County Superintendent, south and east of Emporia, and I also serve as the KSSA president. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Rumford from Scott City. My 7th year as a superintendent and proud to represent Western Kansas on this committee.
Alicia.
Alicia Thompson, Superintendent of Wichita Public Schools. I'm serving my 4th year as superintendent here.
Frank.
Hi, I'm Frank Harwood. I'm the superintendent for DeSoto Public Schools in Western Johnson County, and I count things a little differently. This year was my 50th first day of school between being a student or an educator. So,
Bert. Well, I saw Bert at one time. Move ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, I'm here. No, I'm.
Oh, are you there, Bert?
Yeah, sorry. I am sorry that I am partially masked, but I still have students in my classroom for another 9 minutes. So I'm Bert Lewis. I teach high school social studies at Fort Scott.
Okay, welcome. Tracy.
Hi, you can probably tell that I also had kids. We actually just dismissed a minute ago and they were very excited. I'm a 6th grade teacher in Wichita Public Schools.
Okay, Jason.
Hi, Jason Winbolt, USD 230 Spring Hill board member, and I'm also the president-elect designee for KASB.
Thank you. Janet.
Hi, I'm Janet Eaton, and I am the superintendent in the diocese here in Wichita, and I'm into my 3rd year. Prior to that, I was 20 years in the Archdiocese of St. Louis.
Okay, Nick.
I'm Nick Campione, and I'm representing the Salina Diocese, and I'm the president of CARES, Association of Independent Religious Schools, and this is my 44th year.
Adam.
Good afternoon, everybody. Adam Prophet. I am the director of the budget for the state of Kansas under Governor Laura Kelly. I am in my 0th year of public education, but I'm a proud product of the Topeka Public Schools.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Melissa Rooker. I am currently serving as the executive director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund. I believe I'm here in my capacity as Governor Laura Kelly's appointee to this special project. And well, I can't count the years, but I did serve in the Kansas House and focused on education issues as a policy specialty. So happy to be here with you.
Thank you. And I'll be introducing Randy in just a few minutes, but the other people that are with us today from the Department of Education, Michaela Aldridge, who will be the person that kind of takes care of us as a executive assistant to this group. We have Dean Zalek, Tate Tobin, and Doug Boleen from the Department of Education. We have Jeff Kitterman and Lane McBride from the Boston Consulting Group, and they're here to answer all the questions that you may ask to which I do not know the answer. And at this time, I'd like to introduce and welcome our commissioner, Dr. Randy Watson, and if you'll take over now, and we'll follow the agenda as it is presented.
Thank
you. Take over, Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Porter, and it's good to see all of you, and thank you for volunteering to spend the rest of your life on Friday afternoon Zooms talking about federal funding for education. I can't be more happy, and thank you, Jim, for agreeing to chair, and Representative Thomas for agreeing to be vice chair of this important work. As I said yesterday on a Zoom, I think Alicia and I have spent the entire week together on Zooms. But again, so good to see all of you. And thank you again for your work. I'm going to start with somewhat of an overview of the task and the work. Because it's Zoom and I'm going to be sharing the screen, this document was just posted and dropped into your link on your invite. So it will be a public facing document, but I won't be able to see very well questions. So if you could jot down as you go, if you have questions, we certainly want you to understand the charge and why we're here today. And when I get done, which shouldn't take too long, I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can, or again, staff can help answer that also. So again, I created this task force. We'll go through it for a variety of reasons, but historically, our agency has, since 1965, has taken care of federal funding as it relates to title programs. And whenever the U.S. government has distributed money, it has generally done so through the title formula. And it's doing so again this time. What's really different is this time it is a large sum of money, and they did not distribute to private schools on that formula. So that's what makes it really different. We'll discuss some of that going forward. The state board, and 2 members here can certainly attest to this, set out a very ambitious vision and goals for schools in Kansas. Really the highest in the country. There's no doubt about that. Setting graduation rate goals at 95%, post-secondary completion at 75%, academic standards that are in some cases up to 2 standard deviations above other states, all with the reason that in order for our young people, and Representative Thomas talked about this with his own children, for our own children at the time they're about 16, 17, 18, 20, that they can execute any plan that they want. If they don't have a multitude of skills, they'll be limited in what they have to do. And that was the driving force from what Kansans told the state board and what they put together. These go hand in hand. The definition on the left is pretty self-explanatory. There are 5 areas of preparation that you need in concert to go on to post-secondary education, whether that's technical school or 4-year college, get right into the workforce, and to do well without remediation. State board's measuring some things over on the right and in concert with the left in order to make that happen. I might also say, as you look at this, we know that when you get to be young adults or old adults, like maybe some of us on the Zoom are today, including myself, you certainly know that it hasn't been since I completed the ACT exam and went off to Kansas State in the 1970s that anyone has asked me to produce my ACT score. That being a successful adult is a combination of academic and other skills. So this is the backdrop by which this money will be used in trying to achieve these goals with students and families that have been affected by a pandemic. Here's who we serve. As you can see on the left side, 65% of the funding source in Kansas comes from the state, at 27% local, about 8% federal. That 8% federal is primarily in the area of special education, a little bit of title programs, and food service. We will be focused on our work on federal dollars coming to education in the form of a almost like a grant, if you would. It's not state money, it's not local money, it is federal money. And here are the students that we serve and kind of the demographics of those students that we serve. This is, I hear a fair amount that schools must have saved money this year. Probably in Salina, if any time that we were in a hybrid or remote, must have saved money. But there were all kinds of things that drove significant cost and needs across Kansas. And I won't take time to read all of these, but just take for a minute, technology, equipment, and support. I can just tell you, I know here in Topeka, not only did Topeka 501 have to buy devices for students, they had to provide hotspots. They funded cable through Cox Cable and other ways in order to make sure that students could be remote and hybrid when the virus load called for that. So those are the type of things that we're going to be trying to address as we go forward. Here's just some things that we have done since March of 2020 on the left, and then some quotes from some outstanding educators across our state representing large school districts, as the largest in Wichita, to small school in Olpe and Alice and Heston, somewhat in between. On the left side, I just kind of go through a fairly quick chronological order of services that we did. First thing we did was scale up that we could feed every child if we weren't going to be in school back in March of 2020. Cheryl Johnson and our team were one of the first in the country to get the waiver that just allowed us to do that. And as you know, if you remember back, we were feeding thousands of families throughout March and throughout all the summer. We did 3 documents, and I say we, is the teachers and educators of Kansas, continuous learning and navigating change, and just produced Navigating Next, giving guidance to school districts at how to manage this pandemic. For many months, we had daily meetings with superintendents on Zoom. That has now gone to weekly, again, to cover materials and things that are changing within the pandemic. We still do have a Cracker Jack Medical Health Advisory team made up of health professionals, that public health officials, scientists, epidemiologists, medical doctors, nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists that advise on gating criteria, and we continue to meet with them. And then I don't know if how many of you know our alliance with PBS, and really great work that Diane Smokorowski and other teachers put together throughout the spring and summer, where we actually had lessons on public TV. A great partnership, and I want to thank them for that work. Here's where we're going to be about. And we're going to hear a lot about ESSER. We'll throw that term around a lot. It stands for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. And we'll be calling it ESSER. We're also going to be using the EANS money, the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, because this is the first time and maybe ever that, again, private schools haven't been funded through the Title I formula. So what we're going to be about, as you can see here, the focus of this task force will be on what we call ESSER 2, approximately $370 million to be distributed to school districts. ESSER 3, and you notice it's grayed out. Why? That is yet to pass Congress. We believe that the House is voting on that today, and they may have passed that out. I'm not sure. I haven't been tracking it, but it looks like that maybe by the middle of March, there could be another allocation of ESSER 3, and then the EANS money of almost $27 million, and you can see the time frame. That is our charge. School districts have received ESSER 1 money. They are already using that money, and this task force will not be delving into that money, but ESSER 2 and beyond. We really want to make sure that we maximize the use of these funds to meet the needs through the Kansas CAN vision of the students in Kansas by adhering to all the federal regulations as we do it. So we're going to be doing these type of things and making sure that we have this balance of local control and transparency to foster the public trust in how these funds are going to be spent to help families all across our state. Here's the scope and the responsibilities of the task force. So you're going to be reviewing all not yet awarded federal relief money directed to K-12 education. You're going, and that again, ESSER 2 and EANS money. Any additional funds that Congress would appropriate, we don't know if they will, but it looks like they might, will also be the purview of this task force. Local agencies and non-public schools will submit requests to the task force, and the task force will recommend, pass recommendations that then will go to the State Board of Education for final approval. And you can see the flow under the responsibilities. You will review and recommend approval of those plans. The private school is a little bit different process that we'll be talking to you about more next week, but you're going to be recommending the allocation of those funds because it's a fixed amount and it's somewhat competitive. You'll be reviewing those plans submitted by the private schools. You're going to get regular reporting on how this money was spent across the state, by region, by school district, and by the state of Kansas, and the outcomes that we're getting with that money, and then review and recommend any approval to modify those requests that come in over time. Here's the flow. Meetings are going to be Friday. We did that to try to help our educator friends, and it looks like 3 o'clock just almost gets everyone out of school. These meetings are being live streamed and they are being recorded. And we will meet initially every week. That may last us through the month of April. And then we'll probably be going to less regular meetings, and, and materials will always be sent out to you a few days before the meeting, and all the reference materials are posted on the website, as is the YouTube link that many people, I'm sure, are watching today. As Jim mentioned, we have a crackerjack team of staff on our staff that will support this in this work. Also a great team from the Boston Consulting Group. They will provide all of these things that you see here and more to make sure that all of your questions are answered and all the data is being collected and disseminated appropriately as we go on. So we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to really model how to use an abundance of resources to maximize student and family success, and how we can come back from this pandemic even greater than what we are now. Before I end this portion of it, Mr. Porter, and answer any questions that people have over either the charge or where we're headed, I want to be clear about this because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in Kansas about this money. This is federal money allocated on the public school side to the public schools. It is not my money. It is not this agency's money. It is not the state board's money. It's not the governor's money. It's not the legislator's money. It's federal money. We have oversight of that money, but it goes directly to Mike Augerbright in South Lyon County. And that not all of it. I know Frank was going to wrestle you there, Mike, for some of it, but that's very, very clear. Our goal is to give oversight to that money so that when the federal audits come and the public ask, how was this money spent? We can tell them with clarity it was spent according to the law and in this manner. And that's why this task force is here. And that's, again, appreciate your time and your volunteerism to be here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions, and I could go back to that PowerPoint before we get into the specifics of the ESSER II funds and the EN's funding categories.
Okay, there are two questions I see. First, is there a cap on how many dollars can be requested per district? And the second question is related. Is this a first come, first served grant situation?
Yeah, that's great. And so let's first say this. Those two questions, I believe, are on the private school side of the ledger, because this money's a little different. On the public school side, they get a specific dollar amount. So Wichita has a specific dollar amount that they have. They don't apply for any more or any less. They just tell us how they're going to use it. Different on the private school side. So there is no limit to the dollars that can be asked for, but there is a priority to private schools that have large number of students that are in poverty. And we'll go through this in detail next time when we go through the application process. So that was the answer to the first question. And the answer to the second is no, it's not a first come, first serve. We're going to bring those to you in batches and make sure that within the time frame allocated by law, everyone that applies has equal access to get that money. So again, we'll go over that a lot more in detail next week. But when we look at the application process and we see how it will flow to you, but hopefully that answers those questions, at least right now.
And those are the only questions I see right now, but if you have questions later, just let us know and we'll try to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. So you may continue to the next step. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Porter. What that means is that this Cracker Jack task force wants to make sure that they exceed expectations and always end before 5 o'clock. That's yes. There's incentives on a Friday afternoon to have a task force. All right. So let me now share with you what the law says around ESSER 2 and the 15 categories in the law that the money must be spent on. So you have this in your handouts. It is also on the website for those that are following along on YouTube. This is the background. I'm not going to again read all of this to you, but I want to focus that it happened on December 27th. President Trump signed this into law and awarded the ESSER 2 funds of $54.3 billion to be sent across the United States. Some key points, though, that I want to emphasize. Make this a little bit bigger. This is not a stimulus bill. It is a pandemic recovery bill. And the intent is to assist students, and I'm going to say families, who have fallen behind or have entered into some kind of difficulty due to pandemic. We'll be walking through it. It could be academically, social, emotionally, any other area. So the purpose is to safely reopen schools, to mitigate any learning loss that we have had. And measure that learning loss, and also keep track and make sure that that we record the gains that are made, both social, emotionally, and academically, with families and students. We've gone over some of this, so I'm going to go to the 15 areas. But before I do this, because everyone's going to get in the weeds on this, so I'm going to stop for just a second. I'll share this with you again, because this is how an old social studies teacher, I need to see the classroom, right, Tracy? You know, when you can't do that, it throws you off. So you have to think of two things every time we approve money down the road. And the first one is most important. Is the use of this money because of the pandemic? That's so essential, because when you get into, well, you can use this money for curriculum resources. Someone's going to say, hey, you know, let's go buy some new curriculum. Did you need it because of the pandemic? And then we'll go into the 15 categories. This is really, really important, because the money is sent to the schools, both private and public, to be used to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. And so I just wanted to point that out as we go through the 15 items, because everyone's going to get really in the weeds with the 15 items, and rightfully so. So number one, is any activity authorized by Esea of 1965? I'm not going to read this to you, but I want to give you a little history lesson. President Lyndon Johnson declared war on poverty in the mid-1960s, and out of that created the title programs really to help eliminate poverty and help kids read and in mathematics and other areas. And so you can use this money for any activities authorized by that act. You can use the money to response efforts in consultation with public health departments. So if you're, let's say you're giving vaccinations, you know, Jamie, I don't know, in Scott City, have you guys, just give me a thumb, have you started vaccinations in Scott? Yeah, okay. So for example, you could say, look, we're gonna rent facilities and bring people in. You can coordinate response efforts and use the money for that. You can provide principals and other school leaders resources necessary to address the needs of their individual schools if it's what? Pandemic related. So we're going to have this sheet every time we meet. Activities to address the unique needs of low-income students. Title formula, and the formula on the EN's money is specifically set out to make sure that low-income students with disabilities, English language learners, racial and ethnic minorities, homelessness, foster care, receive priority in how this money is spent. So outreach, service delivery, home visits. I know sometimes we're going to be talking about summer school pretty quick. So busing students, providing meals, lots of things, but that could be part of it. You can develop and implement procedures and systems to improve your response and preparedness effort of the schools or your community. You can use it for training and professional staff development to minimize, so how to clean better, how to minimize the spread of infectious disease. You can purchase supplies and sanitize and clean. And by the way, I'm just going to stop for a second. You can also reimburse expenses. You don't have to approve them before, you can reimburse. You can spend it on the planning for long-term closures of building. So providing meals, guidance on how we're going to do with IDA and any other requirements. You can purchase education technology, as we said. You can provide mental health services and support. It's number 10. I might just say on that, that can be for staff and students, bus drivers. I know we've talked about that staff have been impacted. You can provide mental health services and support. Well, I'm sure we're going to spend, we'll see a lot of applications with that as part of it, as we will with 11 and 12. Planning and implementing activities related to summer school and supplemental after-school programs. And then addressing learning loss among students, which is number 12. I'm going to just kind of highlight these three again. Mental health, summer school and supplemental after school, and addressing learning loss are top priorities for the State Board of Education. We have an opportunity with a large inflection of money to really make up some ground that happened this past year on all of these fronts. So you can see in this learning loss, you've got to show evidence-based activities. You've got to track attendance and show that things are getting better. There'll be some reporting that comes out of this. School facility repairs and improvements, key to reduce the risk of virus transmission and exposure to health hazards. So, Lisa, it's not that Salina Central hasn't had a roof for 20 years. That wouldn't be caused by the pandemic, right? But if you've got mold and that's releasing something and causing more health, that could be a possibility. Projects to improve indoor air quality, ventilation systems, both portable. As you know, in navigating next, we recommended at least MERV 13 filtration systems. I'm saying a building where we're using MERV 13 filtrations in our building and fresh air is being circulated at all times. In addition, our agency in our areas have purchased high-level air cleaners that several of those are on every floor, and in conference rooms and in large offices like myself, we have smaller versions of that to doubly clean the room for protection of our people here. That would be true as we look at schools and other activities that are necessary to maintain the operation and continuity of services. So that's kind of the catch-all, but again, has to be pandemic related. This will be tough on all of us because we will look at this and say, well, I want to use it in other ways, but these are the 15 areas that it can be used for pandemic related services and expenses. So it can be services and expenses. Now we'll go over the EN side of it in just a second. That's the public school side. Again, I want to emphasize, because Bert's going to tell me, Randy, you know, I'm a good teacher, and you need to learn from me that you always want to recap, right? So this money, federal money on the public school side, not ours, going to the public schools. They don't have to worry about the amount. They have to worry about how are they spending it. Pandemic related within 15 areas. Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions that the group would have on public school expenditure of EN's 2 money.
Okay. At this time, I don't see any questions, but again, you'll have, Representative Thomas.
Yeah, quick question. Did we leave the term at risk out of that category? Was there a reason behind that? I know it lists, racial minorities, all those things, homeless kids, all that, and that's awesome, and I appreciate that. I just wonder if we should insert at risk in there as well.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. What you see in there didn't come from us. That is the federal law. So I'm just showing you what the federal categories of the law state. And they did not use the term at risk. They said students that had a loss, which would be our term for at risk.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay.
Are there time parameters when the money can be spent? Will it be able to cover more than one summer of extended school year or only the first summer? The answer is that is yes, but I'll let Randy be more, more specific.
Yeah, so Melissa also, asked the 15 areas designated in federal law. Yes, what I showed you is the federal law. This is not us making up anything other. We're not making anything up. We're using the federal law, we're applying the federal law, and we're making sure that school districts, both private and public, adhere to the federal law. So when the audit comes, again, 2 things. When the audit comes, and it will from the federal government years from now, they don't say the nasty words. You didn't spend this money correctly and you must pay it back. And that'll be in some other budget cycle. That's one of the reasons we're here. The other is to give the state of Kansas confidence and transparency in that they know this money is going to great use. So those are the 2 reasons. Tracy, yes, money, time parameters. ESSER 2, Tracy, must be spent by September of 23. So one of the things that you want to think about, schools will want to think about, is they don't have to try to mitigate the loss immediately. It can be spread out over time. And Tracy, one of the things, you'll see some school districts only apply for a portion of it now, and then look at the results they're getting, and then maybe apply later, right? Because they want to see how that works. So, Mr. Porter, I'll let you call on people.
Okay, Jamie.
Thanks, Dr. Watson. When you got to number 12 on addressing learning loss, you briefly mentioned there will be some reporting. Can you explain what you meant by that? Will the districts have reporting to do on their improvements with their approach to learning loss, or how does that look?
Jamie, and as we go through this, I might add that as we look at the application next week, next Friday, we'll try to walk through even more of these and give lots of examples with it. So you can see exactly what the federal law says here, and tracking student attendance and improving student engagement. Of course, it says distance education. We'll be looking at, let's say you did summer school, Jamie. Where do the kids, what was the data? Why did you ask to do summer school? And at the end of that summer, what kind of gains did you see? That's really in essence. So if you're measuring social emotional and you're doing some counseling, you would have some local data. We don't want the student privacy information. If you're doing academic work, you'd want to have some academic data. Does that help?
Yes, it does. I guess the question was in terms of how would that impact an audit later on if improvements were measured based upon the money spent, I guess is. But if we get into that later on, I can certainly wait. That was more what I was getting at.
Oh, I think certainly if you can validate that we're using really good assessment, we validate it. Some kids are going to grow a lot, some not quite as much. And Jamie, it comes back to what I said about Tracy's question. That's why some school districts will say, you know what, I'm only going to ask for summer school and maybe some extended school year to start the school year early. And then we're going to evaluate how much progress we made, and then we'll use another chunk later. Some people will say, no, we know what we're going to do. We want to establish our kind of a master agreement with staff over 2 years. So I think as long as you're just noting, what happened, what did people come, who came, and keep those logs similar to what you do during the school year.
Okay, Adam Provitt.
Yeah, thank you. And Commissioner Watson, I actually have two questions here. First would be, as we're reviewing applications, is the board or the Department of Education making recommendations to the school districts, or at least strongly encouraging, hey, we strongly suggest, and I'm going to tip my hand here and show what I would like to see is, we strongly suggest extending the school year by X number of weeks on the back end, or pulling it up on the front end, or investing in summer school this year and next year, or investing X in tutoring. So that's question one, is the department at least encouraging schools to consider certain sets of options?
Yes, the answer is yes. So, and you hit on two of those major options. So we're strongly encouraging to look at summer school and take some time off. Don't go the entire summer right up until August 1, but consider then extending the school year by, let's say you generally start August 15th, start earlier. And then we're also, through Navigating Next, also recommending that look different. For example, please don't have summer school and put kids on a computer, especially in areas that have been remote. We want to make it engaging. We want to make it more project. We want to make it high level. Now, there'll be some tutoring with that too. So yes, that's a long answer, Adam, but yes, we will be giving some guidance out. But remember, that's guidance. As long as they use it within the 15 categories and you approve that, they can use it for any of the 15.
All right, thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, one more question.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. So the funds are going to be distributed as a drawdown to the schools, as I understand it, using Title I. Can you, and maybe this is too into the weeds for this discussion, but that differs greatly than the typical school financing formula that the state money goes through, right? So the same number, the same dollar amount, if it were distributed under the school finance formula, would be vastly different by district than it is under Title I.
Oh, yes. So we'll come back to Representative Thomas's question. So in school finance, you have from a distribution, not from a local versus state versus federal, you have an adequacy, how much money does everyone get, and you have an equity. So if you have some poor students and larger percent, you get what's Representative Thomas said, at-risk money. You get money for that. So there's an equity component, right? There's an adequacy. But this money is an equity. This is not an adequacy. That's extremely important. And so when you look at it from a just pure dollar amount, I'm going to use 2 school districts that are within just a few hundred students of each other and pretty close geographically to each other. Kansas City, Kansas, and Blue Valley. In an adequacy formula, both of those get so much money in state money on base aid per pupil. Then Kansas City, Kansas gets much more money on the equity side because they have greater number of poverty and minority students and homeless kids. In this formula, there's no adequacy. It's all equity. So in this formula, Frank is here in DeSoto, he's one of the school districts that get the least amount of money per pupil because there's no base amount that the federal government set on this. It's distributed based upon the Title I formula. So thank you for asking that, because I don't think many people understand that. It's not sent out to everyone gets the same, and then some people get a little bit more. The range of this is $66 a student to $2,300 a student. Now, that's different when we get to the EN side on the private school side, Adam, but on the public school side, thank you for that question.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Melissa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Randy, can you just speak a little bit about the drawdown process? I know from my experience with federal grant funding, our programs can't draw down until it's time for us to reimburse them for costs or until it's time for them to actually use the funds. But we ask them to submit budgets and plans for the length of the grant period. So I'm curious, as I hear concerns that ESSER 1 is not being utilized, there's still lots of money there. Can you speak to what federal rules apply to the drawdown process?
And Melissa, thank you. I'm going to give you an overview, and if we go much deeper in your questioning, I'm going to rely on some of our staff here to tell you. But if you think that we take the $370 million that is in this and we get it and we put it in the bank and we get to draw interest, and no, we draw down money as we believe school districts are going to access it. And so again, in this scenario, Goodland doesn't get any money of their allocation until they're approved, and then they draw down that money as we need it. And we draw it down from the federal government in order to pay that out as we need it. So we don't have that money sitting here now. We'll start allowing school districts to draw it down in April. And again, we'll draw down based upon the requests that we get for those allocations, and we'll distribute it as the task force has approved it. Did that answer it, Melissa?
Well, it does. I would say the point being it's the federal government that wants to earn the interest on the money. So they want to hold on to it until it needs to be utilized, which is why you see districts with spending plans that were approved last summer for ESSER 1 that are halfway through their spend because they're halfway through the time frame they're allowed or whatever the timeline is. But that's why there is still, when looking at a report that says there's still X number of dollars that have not been drawn down, we're not allowed to till it's time to spend it.
That is correct. And we're not, of course, this task force won't have oversight over ESSER 1 money, but that also doesn't need to be spent immediately. It's got some time frame on it. And that's what people think. Well, you draw it down and then you go spend it immediately. No, this is, Tracy asked the question, September of 23, this money has to be spent. And we will encourage people, take the long-term approach to that. The only caveat, we'll go back to Adam's statement. The only caveat of who we have to really address immediately is the seniors of 21. We've got to get them off to military and college and wherever they want to go. That's a priority. But if you're a first grader, yes, we want to catch you up, but it doesn't all have to be in 24 hours. We've got some time to do that in a very methodical approach of drawing that down.
Those are the only questions. Does that answer your question, Melissa? Okay. I don't see any other questions, but there's some comments, including some websites on the chat box that you may want to access. And then I would suggest that the department look at the statement that Lisa Peters made, and that might be something that we need to consider going forward. Let's go ahead to the next area, Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will tell you, our staff, Lisa, are already on that just by you posting that. When you bring up things like that, that gives our staff something to go work on because it's important. And Brad's going to make sure we drop that navigating next, both on the website and to all of you in email too. Thank you, Representative Thomas, for that. Okay. We know how to distribute this money on Title I. We've done it since '65. Not this amount, but we have no history on the private school side because almost every other time it's been distributed right along on that Title I formula. So we're all going to be in this new area together on the EANS side. So let's take a look at the EANS money. First of all, whoops, I'm sorry. You're getting a look. All right. This is around $27 million. It does not come out of any of the public school side. It sets alone. And you have to ask for the money with the plan. So as Janet sits here as the superintendent for the Wichita Catholic Diocese, she is not getting a predetermined set amount of money as Alicia is on the public school side. It is different. That's difference number one. Difference number two is, before we get into the areas they can spend it on, they have to apply to receive services and assistance in these areas, and they cannot own, you'll see this as we go through the application, they cannot own equipment past the period of time, which is September of 23. So when we get into sanitation things, we'll have to think of things that either they use up or will be really used at that time that the state of Kansas will own. The state of Kansas has to own this. That's federal law. So everything I'm telling you, going back to Representative Thomas's question, is because it's federal law. We're not doing anything outside the federal law. Here are the areas that they can request services or things. Supplies to sanitize, disinfect, or clean. PPE. And ventilation systems, including windows, interesting enough, because I don't know how you you can't own the window permanently, and our staff may come in and help you on some of this, but you certainly can get portable air purification. And that may be how they want to spend some of their money. Training, professional development, that's true on the public side too. Sanitation, use, physical barriers, so those plexiglass barriers to facilitate social distancing. Other materials and supplies recommended by CDC. Capacity to administer testing and monitor and suppress the virus. Could hire nurses, aides, could do that. Again, education technology, very broad. Here's again, instructional plans for remote or hybrid learning. Leasing spaces to ensure that you can social distance and be safe. Reasonable transportation cost. Initiating and maintaining support services for remote or hybrid, and addressing learning loss. So the same thing, they can run summer school, they can run extended school year, and reimbursement for any of those services back to March of 2020. This list is a little shorter, but many of the same things. Now, what makes it a little bit more difficult is, again, the money doesn't go directly to the private schools. We are asking the service centers to manage this money, and it will be drawn down as they request it to be used. So, give an example. Nick may say, well, we want to run summer school, Randy, in all of the private schools in north central Kansas, and there's whatever the number is, and we can't send the money directly to Nick to pay them. They're going to be paid per the whatever Nick asks for by, for example, the Smoky Hill Service Center. This sounds, I know all of you are going to look at me and say this doesn't make any sense, as you just explained it on the public school side. It is different because that's the way the federal law is written. It's not because we're drawing up those procedures. We can't send the money directly to the private schools. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions and should have on this side. But this, we have to have the application out in 30 days. We'll hit that easy. But 30 days from receiving the application, the private schools have to have their plans submitted and approved, or they don't have access to that money. I want to say that again, because I said for all the public money, I told Jamie, you may want to spread this out over a couple of years. Come to us several times, with chunks of it. Janet and Nick, you won't have that luxury, unfortunately. You have to put together a comprehensive plan by building of how you would use this money again through September of 23, but you're going to have to get it approved by the end of April. And that's the federal law. Wish it wasn't. That's the federal law. And it has to be by building, even though I think, Janet, you may be organizing that by the diocese, which is really helpful, but it has to be by building and allocated by such. So, Wichita Collegiate, which is a non-accredited private school, could apply for this money perfectly fine. Once we go through the application next time, they could go through the application. They could say, we need $838,000, and here's how we plan to spend that $838,000. We'll take all of those things in consideration. We'll look at the poverty. We'll have to weight those things. Staff will take a look at that and bring you some recommendations, and then we'll approve those by the end of April. That is why the ENs and the private schools, as we meet on Fridays, will have your top priority, because that money has to go out first. And so if we run out of time on a Friday, we're going to approve the private school ones first, and then we'll get to the public schools, because we can always reimburse the public schools in arrears, and we don't want to leave any private school out that wants access to that money. That money is set aside for them. Any money not spent by the private schools then goes back to the governor to be used for other pandemic relief in accordance with law. Can't spend many more money, but could be less. So it's very different process. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would again stand for questions.
Okay, the first question, how many students are served by qualifying non-public schools? I think we need to make sure that people understand that this all non-public schools are eligible, not just accredited schools. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I can tell you that we don't have a great accurate count. No one does on the non-accredited private school side, because all they have to do is register a name and an address with us. On the accredited, again, the Sonic Catholic schools or the Lutheran schools or the Independence Bible College, we know what that number is, because they're accredited like a public school. So, but we're required by law to register non-accredited private schools, but we're not. We statutorily we're giving no access to any other data. So, for example, we don't know how many students there are in Wichita Collegiate. We don't know how many students there are in Sam's home school because we're not allowed to ask any questions of a not accredited private school. Hope that helps, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and Adam, you came up with a number here. What's the basis of that number?
I looked that up on the number of 2021 school year registered top private schools in Kansas.
Okay.
Says they serve about 42,000. So if I'm incorrect, please correct me.
Okay, well, I'm not, because I don't know.
Okay.
And I would look to staff on that, Representative Thomas. They may put something in the chat if Dean or Doug, Kate, Brad dropped in about 27,000 private accredited.
Right.
But
yeah, that's why I clarified that, because I think he was not just referring to only those private schools, but yeah.
And Nick, I know that you represent the independent private religious schools. Our biggest one, not our biggest, but one of our biggest challenges is getting this information out to places that we don't know about. We don't have any access to direct contact them, but they have a right to apply for this money. And so any help that you can get past this public session and that we're publicly putting out the information would be helpful. And Nick, do you have some ideas on that?
Randy, this is Nick. CARES has 33,000 students. That would be both accredited and non-accredited. Beyond that, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Well, you're probably someplace in the ballpark, Adam. So, okay, the next question, Senator Petty.
Thank you. In the first statement that you provided for us, Randy, about the kinds of materials that would be eligible for the non-public private schools, and you talked about that they couldn't be anything that they would own, and yet there were windows listed there, air ventilation systems, and you mentioned like dividers for safety. So I'm just curious, would these things have to be destroyed if they purchase them after 23, or is that kind of gray?
Not gray, but I'm going to rely on staff, Senator Petty, because the state of Kansas technically owns them, and I don't know where they would go. So I'm going to look to our staff to Brad, do you want to take that?
Yes. So the types of services that, because many of our private schools already have a relationship and work with their service centers, and we have 7 of them across the state. So they will be providing services like professional development. If a private school decides that they need to, they look at their data and they want to do some summer school, then those teachers will be paid by the service centers. And again, same thing with the service centers. Each month they will draw down the federal funds to reimburse to be able to pay those teachers. They will be able to do large scale purchasing for the private schools for like software, remedial software, personal protective equipment. So that's the type of stuff. There's like 8 areas, which is a little different, but there's 8 areas that are allowable for the privates, even though it's very similar to the public. But our service centers have already worked up a plan. They will be sending out to all the privates. here's the types of things you'll be able to receive in services. But if it is, they're like, hey, we need some laptops, we need whatever over the next couple of years in order to be able to do this. They can do that, but they would just have to relinquish those at the end of the time. And of course, yeah, what do we do with them after that? Those are just still things that we've got to think about. So I don't know if Tate, Doug or Dean want to add to that, because they've been working closely with the service centers. I see Dean's hopping on here.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And that's exactly it, is that the materials would revert back to the state, and then we would have to dispose of it. I say dispose of it, we would have to dispose of it as we would with any surplus property. But what that could mean is the private schools could buy it back if they wanted to keep it. That's absolutely an option, or it could go to other programs within the public schools. So there's a variety of options.
And Randy, what was that date again for the applications? April what?
The end of April, the last
End of
day
April.
of April.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, the next questions, 2 of them. How about staffing for services, and can funds be pooled within the diocese?
I'm again going to look to staff on as we get into the details of this.
Randy,
Yes.
question.
Yes.
I'll just give you an example. Our schools belong to the same service center. Conceivably, could everything be, I understand about the building needs and whatever approved, can those funds be pooled and shared within the same service center?
Kate?
It's going to get a little technical here. Technically, no. However, let's say your schools needed extra help with mental health and counseling. The service center could hire a counselor that could serve multiple buildings.
That's the I'm looking for.
Okay, because that would be a type of thing that could be done. And we're doing the same thing across the whole program with supplies, so we can get lower bids.
Okay,
yes,
so there's a need for a counselor for several buildings. They could go to the service center and make that arrangement with those funds and apply it to that counselor.
We believe that's correct, Nick. The only thing is with reporting, with the federal requirements, they got to report by building. So each building would have to say, this was the need we had, and this is what we wouldn't, for reporting, we couldn't just have the diocese just do one report. It's got to be reflected by each building and we're going to try and keep that simple, but it would be, we hired one counselor and each building said we received the support from that service.
And I understand about the individual building. That was not, it was just using the pool and using maybe the same resources from the service center. You answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. And I see another question from Representative Thomas.
I know, I apologize.
No problem.
Randy, you said the leftover funds would go back to the governor. Could you clarify? See, I just assumed they went back to the feds if we didn't use the money. And also, would there be any stipulations on those funds?
I'm not an expert on that, Representative Thomas, because we're hoping that all 27 million is used by the private schools. But what I do know is that the money originally came to the governor. By law, she had to give it to the agency to distribute to private schools on an application basis. And the law says any unused money would go back, then flow back to the governor. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on then the parameters of the different areas that she would have to use or not use. Our staff could probably find that out for you though.
That's fine, and I could do some checking on that too. Just wanted to clarify that for all of us. I appreciate it, sir.
Welcome.
Next question, if we do not know the number of total students, how will the EANS money be divided between schools?
It's going to be on an application basis, so it's not going on a per pupil basis. So Janet, let's use you and Nick. You have a lot more kids than Nick. I guess you could ask for less money than he does. The Lutherans could ask for 26.5 million. They may not, the Lutheran schools. So it's not a per pupil allocation. It's a application allocation, if you would.
Well, then
Now,
let me ask.
This committee may prioritize if it exceeds the 27 million. This committee may say, in order to make sure everyone gets something, we're going to do something along those lines if the request would exceed the 27 million.
Yeah, you just answered the question I was going to ask. Go ahead, Janet. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I got it now. So a couple questions with that. I would imagine then all the applications for the non-public are going to be decided at one point. So I'm just thinking as applications are coming in, they'll all be decided at one point, correct? Okay.
And that is correct.
Then a second question, kind of with both the public school and the private school, when we talk about summer school, will there be a wage set across the state for summer school for teachers?
Excellent question, Janet. And I'm going to lean on Tate here a little bit. In our conversations, I believe the answer has been no, but you would request, and Tate, jump on if I say something incorrect here. You would request, we intend to pay teachers X amount for that services, which would be comparable to what it is or market value, and then that's how it would be paid out. Tate, is that correct? We're not setting a standard rate, or are we?
We've had more discussion lately of going with the standard rate. And I know that's kind of one thing we would actually like to hear from Janet and Nick from being there, what their thoughts are. Because the service center would like that. And I know I've had some private schools request that. And so I think this group, it'd be helpful to hear from both of them and their opinions on that.
So there you go. We'll let the group make that decision.
Okay. I'll give some thought to that before I. And then I just have two other little ones. And so I just want to make sure I'm understanding a private school that would hire a nurse. They don't have a nurse, and we can say that, and really by the needs of just everything, they really need that, even if it's a shared nurse. That nurse then, as an employee of the service center, their benefits come from that service center, not from the Catholic school or the Lutheran school.
Correct.
Including like retirement, including, all benefits.
Yes, most likely what the service center is going to try and do is contract those services. So they may reach out to a local health, but they're just going to do their best to find local county to be able to have those services brought to you. So it might look different in Pittsburgh than it would in, the Sedgwick County area.
And Janet, my guess is most of those, as Brad said, would be contracted 1099 employees. So I'm not sure there would be retirement and benefits as we would think about a typical employee.
Okay, and then last question, on those contracts, and I figure there'll be a contract signed with the service center into the relationship, but just the taking into account whose policies will be followed if they're really not a school employee. They're contracted, I understand, but then just looking at, I think then we'll need to look at whose policies are followed. Just a statement.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lisa.
So for the Ian's applications, are we going to have a rubric that helps us to rank them and make these decisions? I know that when I watched our county go through this process with the county cares money, it was very hard because they had way more way more dollars requested than they had to give. And so I watched them go through that, and it was very difficult for them to then decide, whose application was better or worse for the purpose.
Yes, Lisa, and you will also have some recommendations from the staff that you see here, because they will have looked at those and prioritize that within the law, and then highlight things that they think maybe you want to scrutinize or look at a little bit more carefully. But the answer is yes, there will be guidelines on this. The Ian's money is, as Lisa mentioned, is really, it's very different, and it's not the typical way in which federal money is distributed to private schools. So it will challenge us, all of us, on this task force.
I see no more questions. Does anybody else? This is your last chance. Another question, Lisa?
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Another one, and maybe this is for Dean or Tate. Is there a rule that if something is less than $5,000, that the federal government looks as that isn't classified as equipment? So like if a laptop's $800, I mean, are we talking about things that are more than 5,000 that would have to be returned back is my question.
That's a good question, Lisa, and you're a savvy consumer. But you are right that there's a distinction between things that cost more or less than $5,000 for a number of reasons under federal law. But in this case, when we're talking about property that's purchased for providing services to the private schools, whether it's a workbook or a big piece of hardware, either way, it remains the property of the public. And so at the end of the day, it needs to either revert back or the private school can purchase it. Really, it's not exactly an exception, but there's the one distinction would be consumables. So, if you have to purchase additional sanitation equipment, that sort of thing, or sanitation chemicals, that sort of thing that are going to be consumed, there's no expectation that that's going to be returned.
Okay. Any closing statements, Randy?
I just want to thank everyone. Easy lift. Thanks for, right? Easy lift. But really, school districts, both on the private and the public side, are going to thank you for this work and this oversight that you give, because you'll help them down the road use this money and be ready for the audit. And the people of Kansas are going to thank you, because you're going to make sure, again, through this process that it's transparent and that this money is spent in the way the federal guidelines for it to be spent. So next Friday, it's all about the application process on both sides. Dummy look at it, dummy data look at it. Here's how it will flow. All of you to say, I don't like this, I want this, let's do this. That's because then from that point, we'll go in the process of designing, finalizing the design, getting that out, and then the applications will start to come once we send that out to the public.
Now, the commissioner has indicated that we'll be through by 5 o'clock, and we're going to beat that today easily. But since the time frame for private schools is so short, I think it's critical that we get that work done as expeditiously as possible. So he's making the promise at 5 o'clock. I am not. If we have a backlog of those private schools that are on that short time frame, we need to get those done. If we have a batch and it takes longer than that, we need to be prepared to do that early on in the process. Public schools have a lot more time, and it's much less time critical, but it's very time critical for the private schools, and we need to make sure that we meet their needs. With that, I add my thanks and appreciate you being here and looking forward to seeing you all again at 3 o'clock next Friday. If there are no other questions, we are adjourned.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.